Hello, everyone. Welcome to ODI Global. I'm Sara Puntuliano. I'm the Chief Executive here. And I'm really, really delighted that we are hosting this conversation today on artificial intelligence and planetary futures, agency, equity, and cooperation in global AI governance. I mean, who is not talking about AI? You know, artificial intelligence is really reshaping economies, livelihoods, societies. You know, we've seen an incredible acceleration of AI tools adoption in every aspect of life. I'm sure all of you are using ChatGPT or trying, to use Copilot for your emails or whatnot. But it's really, in every domain, from media houses, industrial production, scientific research, government administration. And that is posing a lot of questions. You know, for some, AI really represents a vision of a future where automation displaces human agency and choice. So, in many ways, a vision that is quite catastrophic, even though I guess, it's also progressive. This is almost presented as an inevitable outcome of the AI race, of the progress of AI. But the 2025 Human Development Report, which is titled A Matter of Choice, People and Possibilities in the Age of AI, actually calls out these false assumptions of progress or catastrophe. The report is not asking when will AI surpass humans. Instead, it asks, how can AI augment human capabilities? How can it support well-being? How can it foster inclusive progress? And we also need to discuss who AI is working for currently, which the report also addresses, and how we can ensure that global development of AI promotes agency and equity, especially at a time of really great political fragmentation and extreme inequality. So to understand all of this, we really need to go beyond a technology-centric understanding and analysis of AI and the assumptions that derive from that. And we need to look at the wider socioeconomic and political consequences, which means that we need to study the AI supply chain of data, of labor, of natural resources, and more importantly, try and advance an agenda of global AI governance that takes into account the needs and the perspectives of those who are most at risk of being left out of the current vision of technology progress. So at ODI Global, we started doing quite a bit of work on that. We've been working to advance this agenda through our research, through our engagement on just and equitable AI governance. And that's why we're so excited to be convening this conversation today, because we have some incredible colleagues that will share their perspective on how we can make sure that we really have a progressive and inclusive cooperation framework around AI, and we can make sure that AI delivers for all. With that, I'm going to hand over to Pedro Conceição, the director of the Human Development Report Office of UNDP. You will tell us a little bit more about the report and the findings of the 2025 Human Development Report. For me, it's a bit like going back to the beginnings. I was a UNDP JPO, and reading and consuming the Human Development Reports was very much part of the beginning of my career. So I'm really looking forward to listening to you, Pedro. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Is my microphone working? Can you hear me?
Like that, sorry.
Well, Sarah, once UNDP, always UNDP. So you're still one of us. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. So I'll take a few moments to walk you through the findings of the latest Human Development Report. Every Human Development Report has two parts to it. We try to tell the world where we are when it comes to the aspiration of advancing Human Development Report by using a number of metrics, including the Human Development Index. So I'll start with that. And we also explore a theme, a topic. And the topic of the 2025 Human Development Report was AI, artificial intelligence. Now, when it comes to the Human Development Index, we have good news because we've achieved the highest level of the Human Development Index ever, and the highest level on each of the three components of the Human Development Index: standards of living, achievements in health, and education. But there are two aspects that are very concerning in the findings of the Human Development Report. The first is that the human development progress is slowing. There should be an animation you cannot see, so I'm asking you to imagine. So this is the progress of the Human Development Index up to 2020 or so. And if we were to extrapolate progress of the Human Development Index on the basis of this trend, it would go something like this, right? That's what we would expect. But with the slowdown in progress in the Global Human Development Index, we are actually almost on a flat line. So that's what we expect now when it comes to progress on human development. So we see this slowdown in human development. So still growing, still improving, but at a slower rate. And the second aspect that is quite concerning is that the gap between countries at the top of the Human Development Index and those at the bottom, which was shrinking for decades. So this is what the blue part of the line shows, is that this gap between those at the top and at the bottom was declining for many years. I mean, this is the essence of development, right? That's what we want. We want the gap in standards of living across people around the world to shrink. But we've moved from this process of convergence in Human Development Index to a process of divergence. So now we're seeing that gaps in human development between those at the top and those at the bottom are widening. And it's in this context that we explore the role, the potential of artificial intelligence in this shifting landscape of human development, a human development that is growing more slowly and in which the gaps are widening. And we did that in a way that may be unusual because we didn't try to predict what will happen when it comes to artificial intelligence, but rather we asked people around the world what their expectations were when it comes to human development. And we asked, first of all, whether they were using AI already, and we found that about 20% of respondents across all levels of the Human Development Index reported that they were already using AI. So about 1 in 5 of respondents to our survey are using AI. But more striking, and for us quite surprising, we found that 2/3 of respondents in lower levels of the Human Development Index, 2/3 expect AI to be somehow part of their lives in their work, health, and education. So you can understand our report as a contribution to a responsibility that I think we all share, which is to give a response to these expectations. So people expect AI to be part of their lives, particularly in lower income countries. Slightly less in higher income countries. We can discuss the reasons why, maybe in our panel. One of the ways in which AI in its current configuration differs from different incarnations or generations of AI is that it is something that is very present in all of our lives. AI until November 2022, so 3 years ago, was something that was widely deployed by firms, by governments, by the military, but it was something that was working on in the background. Now AI is something that anyone with an internet connection and a phone can potentially use. And I'm sure that all of you are using AI, as Sarah alluded to already. And so one of the attempts that the report makes is to try to understand the potential and the power of this new configuration of AI, of generative AI, to empower people, but also to warn of some of the risks associated with it. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but one that is very concerning is the biases that are associated with the kind of responses that these models provide to our queries. And some biases are to be expected because they reflect societies that are themselves biased. But one of the most concerning bias is the fact that when it comes to cultural aspects, AI is shaped overwhelmingly by the views of very high human development countries. So what you see here on this slide is the correlation between the responses of ChatGPT and human respondents to the questions of the World Value Survey. And you see that the correlation is high for very high human development index countries, and it sort of declines as we move toward lower levels of the human development index. So there is a bias, a cultural bias, in the way in which the models that we are currently using speak and answer questions, particularly those questions related to values. I think the models are now doing a much better job when it comes to scientific information, to data that can be objectively verified whether it's true or not. But I think this is something that is very concerning. One of the aspects also that is discussed quite extensively. Wow, my time has now gone to three minutes left. I have to speed up. It was 10 minutes for a while. So it has to do with Sarah alluded to this as well. So what will AI do in our world of work? Will it displace us, or will it enable us to do more things? So we asked also people around the world about this. And the questions were, or the answers were quite interesting. So here you see the expectation of the respondents that expect augmentation, that AI is going to augment what they can do. And here on the vertical axis, you see the percentage of people that expect automation, so a displacement of work. And the dots represent occupations and countries, so respondents belonging to different countries and occupations. So I think there are two interesting findings associated with the responses. First, you see that they sort of fall on a 45-degree line. So the more people expect automation to take place, the more they also expect augmentation to take place. So the two are sort of go together in some sense, but there's also a bias towards people expecting more augmentation than automation, right? Again, this is not a prediction, but it is what people expect. So their expectation, what they hope perhaps that will happen, is that AI is going to actually augment what they can do, as opposed to be a force to displace what they can do. Again, I emphasize this is not a prediction, but I think it's again a responsibility that we have to make sure that this expectation is met, and that we don't deploy what Daran Acemoglu called the so-so AI, right? So deploying AI just for the sake of deploying, just because of hype or it's fashionable, because that will not translate into any gains in productivity, and it will come with all of the negative consequences associated with AI, resource use, all the hidden labor that is often associated with the training of these models. So we have all the negative aspects without any of the positive benefits. Now, one of the ways in which AI can potentially augment what people can do is by being seen not only as an invention and a new technology, but an invention of a method of invention. So something that augments and amplifies what people can do. So here, as an example, this is the performance of human players at the game of Go. It's a table game. Are you familiar with the game of Go? Some of you are. So for many years, this was the holy grail of artificial intelligence, because it's a very complex game, much more complex than chess, for instance. Until in 2016, there was, for the first time, a machine that was able to beat humans at this game of Go. And there's a particular way in which the machine was trained, in that it was not trained using data or examples from humans, but the machine trained itself to play the game. And the striking thing is what happened after this happened with the performance of human Go players. It sort of started to go up, because it elicited this comment from a Go player: not a human move, so beautiful. So this new way of playing this game of Go inspired humans. So, I mean, I'm giving you a trivial example of a game, a board game, but the key message here is that AI can also be harnessed to augment people's creativity in science or even in artistic expression. So I'm coming to the end just to give you with final key findings of the report, the key recommendations, which fall in three areas. The first is the importance of building what we call a complementarity economy. So focusing not so much on the displacement, but in exploring these complementarities between humans and AI. Secondly, activating this idea of innovation as AI as the invention of a method of invention, right? Innovation with intent, so that we'd apply AI to augment human creativity. And then finally, investing in the capabilities that count. This means that AI should be seen as, or the way we look at people and AI should not perhaps be defined as a dichotomy between the two, but the real dichotomy going forward might be between people that can use AI, organizations, firms, countries, and those that are not able to do that. So this is in a nutshell the report, the findings of the report. This is the URL for you to download it. I'm sorry I couldn't bring hard copies. But you can see that the overarching message of the report is that we are at a crucial moment in which we can make choices in which AI can be harnessed to advance human development and enhance human agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thanks so much, Pedro. And thank you all for being here. This is a wonderful introduction to the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is really looking at, as Sarah said, agency, equity, and cooperation in AI. So we want to talk about why AI is so crucial to thinking about global development, but also what's really going on, right? We're speaking in a context where there's a lot of hype, a lot of speculation. You log onto the news and there's something that AI has done X on the headlines almost every day. And so let's bring the aspiration here is to bring that context back to bring some grounded context back to the conversations that we're having about AI, to look at where its roots really lie, what's actually happening, and to see how it can really be developed for human progress and for equity and agency. And so I'm really, really pleased to have a fabulous panel, which I'll be moderating. If you could please join me on the stage, Pedro, Alessandra, and Rose. Great. Thanks so much. So we'll start off with some quick introductions, maybe from here. So yes, please, Alessandra, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David. And first of all, I would like to thank ODI for inviting me here, and also thank everybody for being here in person and the colleagues and everybody who is online. My name is Alessandra Lustrati. I'm the head of digital development in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, or FCDO for short, of the UK government. I am a senior private sector development advisor in our organization. I also lead our multi-country digital access program. And a development economist by background, and I've always been interested in the role of technology in trying to reduce poverty and inequality. And I'm very much welcome, obviously, this report, which is an amazing tool for us. Thank you.
I'm Rose Mutiso. Oh, I was wondering why I was amplified. I'm Rose Mutiso. I'm the executive director of the African Tech Futures Lab, which is a new virtual think tank focused on precisely how technology can help rather than hurt outcomes for poor people, especially in Africa. I'm also a senior advisor at the Energy for Growth Hub, which is a think tank based in DC focused on energy poverty. My background is I'm an applied physicist is my background, but I've always been I pivoted to science and technology policy, and more specifically climate and energy transitions, but I'm just really, really interested in where science connects with society.
Pedro Conceição from the Human Development Report Office at the United Nations Development Program.
And I'm Divij Joshi. I'm a research fellow at the Politics and Governance team at ODI Global, where I focus on developing a program on just and equitable digital societies. So let's get going. There's so much to talk about, and thank you for that wonderful explainer on kind of where we are at and the questions we're thinking about, Pedro, as well. I guess the first thing I wanted to discuss was really bringing the conversation and the context back into where we are at with AI, right? What's different about this group of technologies? Is it even useful to think and talk about AI? Like, what's really going on? And so beyond hype and speculation on one side and beyond catastrophic claims of what's going on with AI, what role is AI really having in addressing developmental challenges? And maybe what role should it be having? And I want to start with you, Rose, to just talk about maybe the actual and potential short-term or long-term impacts of AI as we're seeing it being shaped today.
Yeah, I think one thing that we always have to keep in mind with AI is this combination of transformation and uncertainty. So like you said, I think there's a lot of murkiness. The space is evolving fast. I think our imagination for what even AI is very much constrained by the kind of tech powers that be. So, you know, all the LLM talk, perhaps taking the oxygen from like broader suite of like the broader universe of what AI is and can be, including kind of very mature applications of AI, so machine learning, data analytics as under the umbrella. So I think that there's just so much that we're still kind of parsing in our language, in our understanding of AI, and the space is evolving. And so I think this is why there's all of this confusion, like, what is this? What are we talking about? What is it doing? So I find it helpful to just kind of try and ground myself in kind of start from where are we now? So start from where we are. And if you're an African country, if you're a poor country, that's an especially valuable exercise. And so it's what I call like a reality check. And when I look at many poor countries in Africa, my sense of where we are now is that basically for people in these countries, AI is peripheral right now. So maybe if you're a knowledge worker in a capital like Nairobi, AI, you're using it like a global peer, it's augmenting your work, you know. Maybe if you're also a recent graduate in Nairobi and you had been having a thriving side hustle writing essays for UK university students, then maybe you're going to, you know, you've been displaced. So I think that there are some of these kind of like augmentation and displacement dynamics that are happening all over the world that like certain segments of the population and even places like Africa experiencing. But, you know, most Africans and most poor people, they're subsistent farmers, they're in the informal economy. You know, AI is like literally neither here nor there. Other tech transformations have passed you by. You know, electricity from 100 years ago came and went, and you're still where you are. The internet came and went. And so I think that for me, I find a helpful way to ground myself when I hear about all of these grandiose visions of AI or the ways it'll kind of end the world or make the world an amazing paradise. So I think for poor people, what is important is less AI specifically, but more the foundations, infrastructure, education, institutions, like the things that we should have been doing 7 decades ago are still the things that are needed now before AI becomes pertinent.
Thank you. And yeah, I absolutely love this idea of a reality check, both for, I think, people who are looking at AI and kind of aspiring to it, but also the industry and the other people who are kind of driving the narratives around AI currently. Alessandra, on that, I wanted to come to you, and you've been working on digital transformations for a long time now, and thinking about how we approach new technologies and emerging technologies and their role in development. So I'd love to hear how you and also the FCDO maybe are approaching some of these questions and how you've been thinking about really what is AI and what's it going to do to the world.
Thank you so much. Great question. I actually want to build exactly on what Rose was saying just now, that AI can have a role in development, in economic and social development, and actually more specifically, in human development, if it augments rather than erode in human agency, as Pedro has explained really well earlier. So it has a role, but it is part of a bigger picture. So I'll talk a little bit through that and also contribute to what FCDO has been doing, but I'll also share just some of my own insights. So please don't take everything that I say as a government policy caveat. Great. So yeah, I think in terms of use cases, looking at the audience and imagining also the colleagues and other people online, I think everybody knows about the use cases. Yes, we've seen already a lot of really great examples of AI, especially in the countries where AI is accessible, where it's been adopted and sort of rolled out. Use cases in health, in education, in augmenting productivity and innovation in jobs, but also for very particular cases like assistive technology or sort of, closing the gap in some of the cases of sort of social exclusion. So there are some very positive use cases, but then as Rose was saying, this is not necessarily accessible everywhere in the world. So let me just by stating the obvious, AI is a digital technology, right? So with all the hype of the past 3 years or so, particularly since when even senior leaders, so-called, who never really thought that we should be working on digital technology when we work in development, I suddenly realized that, this is a really important tool. But that kind of hype has also made us understand that we need to work on the foundations. Because it's a digital technology, it needs the whole stack, from connectivity to digital skills, to accessibility of digital services, to the presence of what we call locally relevant digital content in jargon. So digital content really makes sense for local communities, for people around the world in very diverse contexts, but also ways of managing risks and challenges. So cybersecurity capacity, online safety, data protection, the whole stack has to be there in order for AI to be accessible, but also usable in a way that really makes sense for people and communities in very diverse contexts. And then when you go to the more specific needs of AI as a technology, as a digital technology, specifically needs sort of the 3 key ingredients of compute and data and talent, as everybody knows, and you can hear and imagine already the gaps that we see there around the world, especially in the countries that are either low or middle income, or even in this context, I think I should say lower or middle human development rather than just income, which obviously is a much better measure of development. So in all this kind of, attempt to embrace AI, we have actually seen that the AI divide has grown and is accelerating and it's expanding. So we as FCDOs, specifically as sort of, in my kind of official role, so to say, I have to say that we've put AI at the heart of a much broader agenda, digital development. We define digital development as our support to partner countries to achieve a digital transformation that is inclusive, that is responsible, and is sustainable. And I'll explain about what that means a little bit later on when we talk about potential solutions. We've placed AI for development specifically as a spotlight within our digital development strategy 2024-2030. If you haven't seen it, very easily available online, please have a look. And we do this both through kind of policy and programming work. We take a digital transformation approach, which is very broad. We think about digital transformation of the economy, of course, but also government and broadly of society. We try to make it inclusive. So when we work on digital inclusion, we focus on the gaps in connectivity, in digital skills, in content, but also then we look at how we can achieve digital responsibility, which means that the digital ecosystem has to be trusted and resilient for people to be able to adopt AI and really use it well. And then finally, also digital sustainability, which is the bucket of work, where we focus on how digital transformation actually has an environmental cost, as we all know, in terms of energy and critical minerals and physical infrastructure, you name it. With AI, these needs have accelerated, so it becomes even more important to look at that. But then on the positive side, on the flip side of the coin, we look at how digital tools and solutions can actually be used to promote better ways of dealing with climate change adaptation and resilience. So I've given you not sure how much long, I've got 1 minute. Thank you, David is my angel, thank you. So I'll wrap up quickly. So I've given you a very quick overview of what is our policy framework, that when we adopt and sort of practice through our programming. A couple of practical examples of this work are the Digital Access Program in some kind of what we call lead countries in their own regions on digital transformation, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, but then also Brazil and Indonesia, so very diverse regions that we've been working in with this program since 2018-19. So we've accumulated quite a lot of evidence and learning for what works and what doesn't work. And then also we have a dedicated program on AI for development that started in Sub-Saharan Africa and is expanding into Asia. But then to conclude, we also think that in order for AI to be really embedded in the kind of broader development agenda, we need to work also through international cooperation. We'll go back to that, I'm sure, towards the end of the debate, but just to say that we contribute very directly to, of course, the UN Global Digital Compact, and also we work within the context of G20, G7, OECD, and others to make sure that we look at those basically what I call supranational issues that cannot really be, and transnational issues that cannot really be dealt with only at country level. I'll stop there. I hope I made it within the 5 minutes.
Yes, you're great.
Right, and I'll tell you a little bit more later. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that. And kind of on that point, I'm curious, for Pedro, and you spoke about this briefly in your presentation, but I'd love to hear the thought process that went into thinking about AI as the focal point of the Human Development Report, right? Because as we see, there's multiple narratives surrounding what AI means and what it does, and I'm curious what went into choosing that as a kind of a subject, and then whether that thinking about narratives and AI's impact also changed across your work on the HDR.
Sure. So first, I'll probably share some reflections on how AI is not different, right? We know a lot from the history of technology, the way in which technologies, new technologies, particularly so-called general purpose technologies, diffuse in society, that the impact has less to do with the technology as such and much more to do with the way in which firms, organizations, society adjusts to make use of these technologies. The economic historian Paul David has a famous paper called The Dynamo and the Computer. And he shows that it took about 50 years from the appearance of electricity as a technology to firms figuring out how to actually move from a production powered by steam engine to a production powered by dynamos or electricity. So I think with AI, something similar to that needs to happen. And sometimes one of the things I worry about is to put so much focus on the technology and less focus on how is it going to change opportunities or create new opportunities to teach in low resource settings, or for a health worker in these low resource settings, or for firms in lower income settings. Because what we're seeing today is that the sort of template for development that was followed for many countries over the last few years is opportunities to follow that template are narrowing. What was that template? That template was one premised on the idea of attracting foreign capital, building manufacturing that is labor intensive, absorbs many people, pays well, and because these economies are small, exporting for international markets, right? Export-led manufacturing, that's sort of the development model. Well, if you think of each of these three ingredients, they are not as available as they were in the past. Foreign capital is not flowing to many low-income countries. Manufacturing is not creating jobs like it used to, in part because of the digital transformation. And opportunities to export to international markets are being constrained with the upheaval in trade that we are all seeing and the fragmentation of international trade. So I think that it's important to look at AI, and so this is why we became interested in it as an opportunity to enable countries not only to expand human development in health and education through the use cases that Alessandra alluded to, but also to actually be an engine for this economic transformation that generates jobs and creates jobs. That all countries are trying to figure out how to do. And again, I'll conclude by emphasizing this point. I think the narratives around AI that are propelled often misguide us, right? Because it's AI. AI is not something that is going to replace people. I mean, it might if it happens, it's because we choose, we let it happen, right? There's nothing inherently in the technology that will determine that outcome. So again, it goes back to the title of the report. It's a matter of choice. I think we have to stop yielding to the technologist, the discourse and the narrative, and have to reclaim the ability to shape the way in which this technology is going to be designed and deployed.
Absolutely. And what I'm getting from all three of you really is two things, right? One, that it is really about the choices we make and the kinds of systems and institutions that we have to shape technology, and specifically AI. And also that these are questions of distribution. So, AI has its own distributive logic as to who benefits from it, who's left out of the debate. And I think this is true also for the kinds of systems we're seeing today. And so I'm curious, Alexander, I'll come back to you about where are we seeing where are we seeing the gaps in who's really effectively able to leverage these systems, right? Rose spoke about kind of the absence of electrification as a very fundamental kind of thing you think about when you have, gleamy kind of visions of what AI is going to do versus people simply unable to access even the fundamentals of this. And so how is differential access to technology kind of shaping these broader concerns around inequality and distribution of the possibly beneficial impacts of AI?
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And yes, we are definitely seeing this rapidly growing AI divide or AI gap, as people like to call it globally, but also then between countries and within countries as well. Especially, we observe that, as we said earlier, on lower middle income countries, lower middle human development countries, that lack resources, capabilities, but also I would like to say frameworks as well. We've already alluded to the importance of choice, the importance of institutions and policies, and I'll expand a little bit on that in a minute. I have to say, from experience of working within and with various countries, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also across Asia, Latin America, we've seen some rising stars, which is really great. I'm not going to call the names, otherwise some of the friends out there will be upset. But definitely, we see some example. For instance, in Sub-Saharan Africa, where countries have really taken the AI concept in their hands, and they're trying to make those choices. And they just want to have a plan. They really want to have a strategy, and they want to make sure that AI makes sense for them. But then they are facing a lot of challenges and gaps, as David was alluding to. We've already said that broad digital transformation is lagging behind for many of these countries in a world where we still have 2.6 billion people offline, which is always a stat that really surprises people, especially those who don't work on connectivity and digital every day. So this is a official statistic of the International Telecommunications Union, that reminds us that there's basically one third of the world, that is still offline, meaning never having touched the internet, not regular or high quality or whatever. And that's about 65% of all of that gap is actually in least developed countries. So that gives you a sense of that, how skewed the opportunity for access is. Because it's about electricity, it's about physical infrastructure, it's about internet access. It's also about digital skills and all the other things that we've mentioned earlier. So I won't repeat those ones, all the stack, the basics of digital transformation. And so not just countries, but as I say, individual people, communities. So it's a real challenge are being left behind as we speak. Then there are the AI-specific structures and resources, infrastructure, capability. So from cloud services and data centers to the access to data per se, and the talent and skills and capability of designing AI in a way that really makes sense for people. But then going to the point that you were alluding to, and I'm expanding a little bit more on that, there is often a lack of plans and strategies, a lack of proper policies and regulatory frameworks that can really help to embed AI in the best possible way, an inability to to govern a market that is highly concentrated. So we've learned a lot of lessons from having done digital transformation at a very basic level, looking at, for example, at telecoms markets in developing and emerging countries around the world. There is a natural concentration of those type of industries in the ICT, just at a very basic level. Imagine with AI, and we're seeing this, with the value chain of AI globally. And interesting competition policies, so the typical structure, conduct, and performance framework they use in competition policy, they're not up to scratch for governing and improving the sort of level of kind of healthy competition and lower the barriers to entry for innovators that maybe are more based in developing countries or middle-income countries and can develop those AI tools that really make sense for them. Because competition policy is normally adapted within within national borders, and these are really transnational and transborder issues. And this is just one of the gaps in the sort of institutional and sort of frameworks. And there's also the dilemma of regulation versus innovation. We need to continue to stimulate innovation, but we need to try and govern the market to sort of, accompany innovation towards the best development outcomes. And people often see the two as sort of, cannibalizing each other, and actually they can work with each other well if we make an effort together. There's also a limited capability in managing the risks of AI. I mean, AI, we keep saying it has really positive use cases. It has this broad cross-cutting potential advantage of creating new jobs, new tasks, and new opportunities, as Pedro was explaining really well, especially with the concept of complementarity economy, as explained in the report. But there are also those risks typical of AI, which are the algorithm bias, misinformation and disinformation in the use of AI, the lack of resilience, because with AI being very concentrated, it means that you have one point of entry and one point of failure. And all of these things are very typical of AI systems, whether you're in a very advanced sort of country or not. So that's something that needs to be kind of improved in terms of the capabilities of low and middle income countries. Also, the inability to manage the environmental impact that I alluded to earlier, so I won't repeat that. The problem of impact on the labor markets. Again, it is about showing that we can really push on the augmentation side rather than the automation that Pedro explained earlier. And as I mentioned very quickly, is that these challenges cannot always be solved at country level. So we need to look at international cooperation to look at them. I won't jump ahead on that because we'll cover it later, I'm sure. So I hope I am within the 5.
For sure. Yes.
Thanks. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And kind of on that, right? I'm also curious about whether it is a question of just adopting the right frameworks or policies, or whether there's something deeper and kind of fundamentally misaligned about the political economy of how AI is being developed, right? And I know, Pedro, the HDR addresses this in some respects, thinking about the kind of power structure that's behind the AI economy, the kind of dependencies that are being created, and where global cooperation on these is really is failing, right? You talked about competition issues, and we see an immense concentration of power, especially amongst the kind of producers of AI. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts about how dependencies and power structures in the AI world are kind of shaping its development.
I think one of the big challenges is that different jurisdictions are very divided on how they look at it, right? So the UK has a model of looking at this regulation versus innovation trade-off. The European Union has a different model. The United States have a different model. China has a different model. Japan has a different model. So I think that, and that's perhaps inevitable given the stage of technology, its novelty, and all the uncertainties that Rose spoke about. But that's the reality, right? So what do you do when you have all of these differences, which is very different from other global challenges, right? In which at least there is an agreement on what the problem is, what the cause is, and what needs to be done to address it. There might be differences and difficulties in implementing it. But I think with AI, we face a more fundamental problem. It's almost ontological, right? So what do we do in this context? And I think that the Global Digital Compact here has the right approach, which was agreed to by member states, and it's in the process of being implemented. Obviously, there are many things in the Global Digital Compact, But on this topic specifically, it does two things that I think are crucial. One is to promote a dialogue between all of these different jurisdictions. Okay, there's no agreement, but let's talk, right? Let's keep talking so that we learn about the motivations that different countries, different jurisdictions have. They can learn from the mistakes or the successes of following different approaches. So that's a process that is already in motion in the context of the Global Digital Compact. And then the second thing that is very important is to ensure that there is an information flowing from the side of science, right? So that this dialogue is informed by science. And so we are in the process, or the UN is in the process of constituting a panel of experts. I believe there's an open call for submissions to inform this dialogue. So this might not be very satisfactory, but given the reality, right, if we want to have a realistic approach to where we are, I think these are two important instruments that the international community has to hopefully at some point move us towards that kind of convergence that at the moment just doesn't exist.
Thank you. And yeah, I definitely think over the last few years, we've seen quite a bit of fragmented policy development in this area. And not, even last year, for example, we saw how the US and the UK both kind of declined to go to a big kind of agenda to set, to cooperatively set the AI development agenda in Paris. And so it's great to see this moving on at a multilateral stage like the UN. And I'm curious, to coming back to Rose, I think, what are we really talking about here? Like when we're talking about AI governance and the issues that we need to solve here, you spoke already about how maybe the impacts and the applications of AI aren't really reaching the majority of people. There's a big kind of divide in AI use and the kind of AI gap. But its material effects are still being felt around the world, right? I think we see AI as the kind of applications we're using in our chatbots and so on. But there's a longer tail of the supply chain and the value chains that drive these. And I'm keen to hear about what you think, how that's developing and how that might feed into a kind of governance agenda as well.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot to that question, and I'm still thinking about what Pedro said two cycles ago about agency. So maybe I'll start there. I'm really, what does it mean? And related to governance, right? So how do countries, especially poor countries, poor people, have agency in this? And especially in a context in which I think agency, wealth, and power are really kind of getting very tightly coupled, right? And it reminds me, so the last week or something, I read an article, I got into a fight with my husband about it because it was about these parents in the US who have created these AI schools for their kids, and it's like supposed to prepare them for the future, and they're taught by AI bots and whatever, and it's supposed to be super, super interesting. But when I looked at this, I thought of this as just wealth and power sublimated into AI narrative, because it's a very expensive school. It's only ultra wealthy parents and the tech people. And I think this is what is happening across the board, is that countries that have like a head start on AI, countries that are already wealthy, countries that already dominate geopolitical debates, that's the agencies kind of collapsing into those axes, right? And so often, to Pedro's point, when people say, when people have converted agency and ability to choose and put it in the hands of whether it's the big companies or the countries, then poor countries and poor people have fewer degrees of freedom. And I've seen this because I've worked in climate for a long time, right? And climate is also where we have this club of all nations, supposedly on an even playing field, negotiating climate. But but then the discrepancies in agency, even if we're all deciding together, really become apparent. And what is decided at the UNFCCC setting and what is not, what is decided at the level of how big is your economy, what trade deals can you cut, and so I think that with AI, this for governance, I think it's important for poor countries to become very astute and aware in a way that actually we've seen a little bit in climate. So poor countries have clubbed together and have actually like really shifted the conversation. So, adaptation, which was not a thing in climate, now is like one of the biggest kind of focus of climate discourse. And that came from poor countries banding together and trying to kind of combine their agency. Similarly, loss adapt, like all of these ideas that were very fringe. And obviously, again, the discussions of the UNFCCC have increasingly limited bearing on what happens in the world, but it's just one way to to kind of create agency and choice in a setting where your degrees of freedom are limited. So I always think in this case that maybe countries that are thinking about governance collaboration, these fora on AI, to really be aware of agency where it sits, where it doesn't, and how you can increase your degrees of freedom where you might not, you don't have the wealth and power shortcut to agency, which is very important for AI. So I think like poor countries, and this is something that poor countries have been like thinking about for a long time. So now with like when you talked about supply chains, this is back on the table about how African countries and poor countries can secure more value from their minerals that are so crucial to the energy transition, crucial to the digital transition. And so everyone is circling around like, how can we convert what we have, our people, our resources into more agency? And I guess my boring answer to that is that the way to do that is not specific to AI. It's governance. It's all the boring stuff. So over and over, I'm always like, it's the boring stuff. It's like a political elite who care about the people, not just their own enrichment. It's ecosystem investments in infrastructure. It's like those are the things that give you more ability to convert what would be your limited agency into a little bit more. And it applies to AI, it applies to climate, it applies across the board.
Yeah, what's interesting to me here is also, the last bit you mentioned, that this isn't about AI, it's about everything else that's related to it. And so I'm wondering from a kind of governance perspective, and Pedro mentioned already that there's a bunch of developments happening in kind of trying to cooperate on AI. So there's the dialogue and the panel that's going on, and the scientific panel. There's a lot of conversations around AI safety and security, so trying to prevent catastrophic harm. That's been the kind of major focus of a lot of AI governance in the world, particularly focusing, I think, on the concerns of richer groups of countries. So where do we go from here is the question, right? What are the kind of actual spaces to advance a progressive agenda that kind of takes into some account some of these questions of agency and inequality? One thing we were recently discussing this as well is this idea around sovereignty, right? Around sovereignty being a guiding principle for AI governance, for every country to kind of come up with its own agenda for understanding what's central to its own interests. Is that a way forward, or do you think, or is it possibly detrimental to cooperation? What does the agenda look like 5 years in the future now?
You're asking me, I don't know, but here are some reflections, maybe 2 points. One is that AI counterintuitively may not be necessarily a driver of inequalities within countries. We don't have a lot of evidence, but case studies that exist that are quite strong methodologically show that it's actually more beneficial to use AI by young and less experienced workers than older and more experienced workers. And this, as I say, it's essentially case studies, but it's something that has been shown to exist across many sectors. So I'm giving this example to see if there are areas of opportunity that can lead to a convergence of action that take us away from, as you were saying, the concentration just on the downsides and risks. So in a way, I could say that there's been a lot of focus on the supply side of AI. Everything from the resource use to the concentration of power, economic power, political power, to the risks associated with misuse or accidental risks. So that has been dominated the agenda, right? That sort of the supply side. Where I think there's a space for more reflection, more action, and potentially more cooperation internationally is on the user side or on demand side. And that was a little bit the focus of our report. And so the example I gave about this counterintuitive evidence that suggests that AI actually may not increase inequalities within countries and can be used actually as a tool to empower less experienced and younger workers is an example of the kind of things that we could potentially leverage to go back to that aspiration of using AI to expand human development and human agency. So I think there's the opportunity, I guess, for a rebalancing of the focus, of the discourse, of the attention. Not to say that the other things are not important. Obviously, they're crucial. But that might open more space for both action and cooperation, sort of the demand and user side.
Okay.
Yeah. One more thing to this. I hope I'm not coming off as like a Luddite or too negative. No, I'm not. I'm a scientist. I like technology. Anyway, yeah, but I guess the point related to adding on what Pedro said is identifying the opportunities, identifying the agency in a context in which you don't have a lot of kind of conventional ways to exercise it, requires you to be really intentional, and it requires you to be kind of, as I said, you have to be creative, and you have to be aware of where the levers are. So, for example, there's a lot of sovereignty conversation in Africa. A lot of the AI discourse, policy discourse, has been around data protection, sovereignty, that kind of thing. But somebody who comes from an energy background, your control over the AI regulatory landscape and the data landscape has a lot to do with, do you have data centers in your kind of within your jurisdiction, And so sometimes that narrative is disconnected from, you're not connecting it to to make manifest that desire for some control, for some protection, is actually the way you exercise that. One way is through this infrastructure lever. So just trying to make sure that the narrative, the tactics, the awareness of what are my degrees of what are my levers, what are my degrees of movement, what are the ways that I can kind of make my goals, achieve my goals, both my sovereign goals, but also my global corporation goals, and what are the tools and the avenues I have. And so that's, I find, often missing. And that's the same with the opportunities. There's the blanket rhetoric, but then it's just where you are, what is concrete, what is viable, what is feasible, what are the actual constraints that are underneath the headline.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the reality check, right, of understanding what's possible and maybe not being driven by speculation or narratives, and building power, as you said, through cooperation. I think that's really the way forward. And maybe my provocation finally to you, Alessandra, is how do we do this in a time of such fractured multilateral spaces?
Yeah, no, thank you. And yes, we should kind of provoke each other on this, because it's a dilemma. And I just want to build on what Pedro was saying about the demand and the supply side. I think we need to choose a different locus for the cooperation, for the kind of push towards, equitable, just, responsible, whatever AI, depending on what type of issue we're trying to tackle. So I completely agree with Pedro that there are definitely some good opportunities, a long-hanging fruit on the demand side. So focusing on the user side, through international dialogue, we can sort of try to show that there is a way forward and there is a kind of, a light at the end of the tunnel, and we can cooperate on that. And I think that's a less, if I may say, controversial space where the dialogue can be a bit more constructive. But then at the end of the story, unfortunately, on the supply side, we do have those hard problems that, let's say from analysis, and actually even analysis is within the HDR, we know that some of the supply side issues, some of them could be tackled relatively well by international cooperation, for instance, data traceability or things like agreeing on standards for, model evaluation, for AI audits, et cetera, that kind of encourage everybody to kind of converge towards a particular type of behavior in a way, towards AI. But there are also other areas of supply side that I completely agree are really not the ones that will be resolved within an international cooperation setting, or at least not the traditional one of the multilateral negotiations. So, and maybe a slight upgrade of that is what people call the multi-stakeholder approach. So where we look at not just governments talking together and negotiating within a multilateral space, but actually also capturing the voices of the civil society, of academia, absolutely, because it has to be science informed, as you said, and but the private sector as well. And now, if we are talking about private sector, you alluded to the political economy challenges earlier on. If we have a private sector that is so concentrated, so powerful, the hyperscalers basically, come on, they're more powerful than many countries, and they are definitely have bigger budgets in many countries. And even if people talk about the AI bubble now, and we might see a downturn of that, the point is that they are super powerful. So how do you actually nudge the industry in the right direction? And I think there must be something that we can do through dialogue, absolutely, but also through cooperation, more in terms of kind of technical cooperation, exchanging of knowledge, exchanging of sort of testing different models, where we go towards alternative and complementary models of AI. That's at least the way I like to use them. And people have worked for a few years now on the concept of frugal AI, that I'm sure people are sort of relatively familiar with. So it's a type of AI that works on a smaller scale models, that uses less energy, less costly. And whether we like that concept or not, whether we think that is viable in all countries, including the lower middle income countries or lower middle human development countries or not, it is maybe something to consider, where through international cooperation, we could try to push towards a model where there is more diversification of AI solutions. Because ultimately, if you reach a level where you can demonstrate that there can be a lower minimum efficient scales for some AI models that are valuable for economic and social development, ultimately you lower at least slightly the barriers of entry into the market. So it's true, it's not, we shouldn't just look at the supply side, but I would argue that is the interplay of supply and demand, and also that those problems on the supply side, one way or the other, need to be tackled. And when we go to the kind of risks areas, I completely agree with actually, obviously, both the colleagues on the panel, that, those risks are there, safety, security, also looking at it not from the kind of just negative perspective, but from the perspective of positively enhancing AI responsibility, or as some people like to call it, AI ethics, is about AI explainability. How do you actually reassure users of AI that a certain decision is being taken by a generative AI in this case, because of certain parameters? How did that kind of, model get to that decision? And that transparency and those systems of accountability are something that they're not really existing yet. Hyperscalers don't really want to share the architecture of their models or the data that are behind all of that. So what can we do to nudge the industry into the right direction and go to what I like to call a fair AI? The way that when I was young, we used to call in the concept of fair trade. And now I think we should be working on the concept of fair AI. And that's definitely something that is not going to be done only by governments, but I think is the interplay of the governments, private sector, academia, and very much civil society. There should be the one that expresses the view of the users, as Pedro was saying. I'll rest my case. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you alluded earlier to this idea of benefit sharing in the international cooperation sense of, that's something we've talked about in the context of other kinds of international agreements. And I'm wondering whether that's, something, how can we design a form of AI governance that kind of works for everyone, but is also pluriversal and kind of like has plurality in values. And I think that's maybe something that we need to be thinking about. So thank you so much for all of your contributions on this panel. That's all from me. And we have a bunch of space, some time for questions from the audience here, both online as well as people in the room. And so we'd love to take and field your questions. Yes, let's go to the front there and then, yeah.
Thank you for an insightful discussion. My name is Zubair. I'm an EdTech founder, so my platform leverages AI to provide educational access to millions of students. I'm also one of the young leaders for UNDP, so I was happy to support the previous HDR report with some research as well. We talked a lot about the importance that multilaterals play. You talked about the dialogic space that was being created. The challenge is that tech giants are funded by private capital, and private capital is pushing these tech giants to build and innovate for a very specific population. What role do multilateral agencies like the UN, like the World Bank and other entities play in actually diverting hard cash, not policy, not regulation, but hard cash towards AI solutions that support human development?
Difficult for me. It's for Rose.
Sure, yeah. Let's take a couple more questions, one there and then one on the front row. Yeah.
I guess I'm building on Zubair's question. My name is Aditi Thorat. I work with the International Budget Partnership. And I'm really thankful, Pedro and Alessandra, for both of you talking about the demand versus supply side issue. And with your permission, I want to go back to the supply side issue. So, communities in the US, and I'm going to take the example of Project Blue, which I hope people are familiar with, but I'll give you a quick summary. So communities in the US, in Tucson, for instance, with Project Blue, are protesting large data centers, 290 acres to be precise, in their neighborhoods, data centers that they believe, and through science which is established, are stealing their water, contaminating and depleting the groundwater and their land as well. So I want to go back to some of those comparisons of risks and benefits of the infrastructure behind AI from a planetary health perspective, planetary futures perspective. Yeah, I mean, this infrastructure is for cloud computing to power the AI boom. I think I've said enough.
There's one in the front over here, and yeah, let's take three. Let's take three, and then we'll come to you quickly.
Yeah, thank you, speakers, for this very insightful sharing about the AI governance. So I'm Zhu. I'm an economic geographer from University of Cambridge, and actually I'm thinking of what factors can contribute to the uneven use of AI across countries. And I have a similar idea related. It's maybe computing infrastructure may be an important or critical point, critical barrier that can contribute to the inequality of AI use across countries. For example, China is a large country with a very large geographical scale. So they can deploy their computing infrastructure in the western parts of the country, where the weather is cooler, so the cost can be lower. But for other countries without such geographical scale or this advantage in nature or endowments, how can they reap the benefits of AI? So my question is, how can international organizations or governments can cooperate to make sure the use of AI can be more equitable across countries? Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. We'll take three, and then we'll do another round. Yeah. Open to the panel. Who would like to address these first? You can.
I can share some comments. So we have a chapter in the report, chapter 5, if I'm not mistaken, that looks at the supply side. And so some of the points that you've put on the table are well taken. I think it's an illusion to look at AI as something immaterial, and that does not have impact on the use of resources, particularly energy, but also water, as something that is not associated with extractive patterns, be it of minerals or of labor. There's a lot of labor that goes into many of what makes the digital world work, from labeling in social media. So we are all familiar with these things. So I think it's an important point to acknowledge. But what we also try to understand in the report is where we are and the moment of opportunity to shape the supply side in the following sense. I don't know if you agree with this, but I see many similarities with AI today with the internet in the 1990s. So in the 1990s, many of you don't remember, you're too young for that, but in the 1990s, there was a fever of deploying infrastructure to enable the internet to function. It was primarily around what we now know as broadband, fiber, fiber optics, all of this, billions of dollars of investment went into this, a little bit like we're seeing with the data centers today, creating many of the same problems in the allocation of capital, in the attractant of investments. The stock market was booming of these companies that were deploying this infrastructure. And then there was a shakedown, right? A shakedown or a shakeup? Not shakedown, maybe shakedowns as well, but a shakeup of firms, right? So out of the many firms that existed at the time, only a few actually made it through. They became very big, huge. Today's hyperscalers for reasons that we can discuss. But to me, the world of AI, not upstream, right? Not at the level of microprocessors or cloud computing, which is also extremely concentrated. But as you move downstream, large language models today are in the hundreds. And even downstream, you see many firms, many opportunities, much volatility and much innovation. So I think that's the good question. So how do we put in place incentives so that capital starts flowing also to these other alternative possibilities? So I think it's a matter of choice, really. Are we going to move in a direction that even emphasizes more and entrenches more those that have a lot of power today? Or are we going to open a space for this innovation to take place in the same way that happened in the late 1990s and the transition to the 2000s that we saw in the internet boom? And again, it goes back to this idea of choice. It's a matter of choice. One thing for me is very clear, and I come back to this point. Let's not defer this choice to the technology leaders or to the firms or to the engineers. They are extremely smart people. I was trained as an engineer, but I know how we think. It's about understanding the economy. It's about understanding society. It's about all of us. We have to be part of making these kind of choices and structure the incentives so that capital starts flowing in this direction.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in. So, so the question of, how we can have especially money from the big multilateral players flow to developing countries. I think on one base layer, again, back to this foundational infrastructure thing, the electricity, this basic infrastructure, MDBs, DFIs are the biggest. In many poor countries are the biggest kind of financiers of that. So I think continuing to channel money into not speculative infrastructure, but that foundational infrastructure is an important piece. Sometimes where I'm not sure what kind of degrees of the ability of big multilateral players to intervene at the level of the small experiments that are coming up. I think there's been a lot of going in ag tech, ed tech. There have been many iterations of trying to activate these solutions. Many have not scaled. But, I think that there's still a lot of, but maybe to Pedro's point, we still need experimentation in that space, and that's fine, just to be trying different things, but there could be there could be a role to direct capital for use cases that are like slightly bigger than just small experiments. So, you know, there's like this big example that has been getting a lot of airplay about the AI-enabled weather prediction model in India that then, you know, in combination with the ministry, some donors, some universities, some research, like it was a big consortium that kind of created like a more robust prediction for the monsoon. And then there was a whole massive exercise to get that information out to farmers. And so that was like an AI for development application or use case, but a bit more at scale as opposed to like a small experiment. So I think for big MDBs and stuff, like the where you intervene is a bit tricky. Definitely there are places that is comfortable bread and butter, like infrastructure, and then like they're like more at scale consortia type things, and then like trying to figure out who is supporting like the innovators from on the grassroots. Now that's the interesting question, and that's probably where you're kind of trying to figure out who the partners at that level are. I think this question on resources is super, super interesting. Actually, you know, my beef with Phoenix is not the data centers. Actually, it's that it's this huge city in the desert where everybody is, I'm just like the whole existence of people in this metropolis is energy intensive. Just by definition, with or without the data center. But I think it is interesting, and I think there are a lot of work needs to be done to parse out basically the resource intensiveness of our entire existence. And you know, the data centers, it's not just for AI, actually data centers, it's for cloud services, it's for Netflix or streaming or whatever. So there are many ways in which this infrastructure is underpinning things that we take for granted, even the people who are protesting. I think there needs to be more awareness of how our lifestyles are connected to this kind of bigger ecosystem. And then also holding companies accountable. We need more efficiency, more innovation. Just we need to be, you know, I mean, the things that we need in society. And as users, we're sometimes blind to where that comes from. But then also the providers, the companies also have a role to play to make things better. You know, I think about like say minerals. There's been a lot of jostling right now about like refining, and China like has so much of the refining market, but then actually refining is really dirty. It's really, really environmentally difficult. Actually, Australia ships its lithium to China because they're outsourcing the environmental degradation problem, basically, you know. And so there are all of these ways in which the environmental impact narrative is more complicated than we think. And I think we just need more awareness. We need to be tracing, like we need to be, both the companies and the civil society, the governments, we need to be tracing those pathways so that we can kind of understand where is the problem, what are the things we really need that we can't do without, where are the places that we can push to improve, where are the places where maybe not every search needs to be AI enabled. And so you know what I mean? So I think there's just a lot of specificity required.
Yeah, so brilliant. So my colleagues made my life very easy because they said already all the important things. I'll try to add a little bit. So first of all, thank you to the gentleman tech founder for raising the point of investment, because none of us had really talked about that. It wasn't really part of the discussion. But ultimately, behind everything that we try to do and improve together as an international community, there has to be that push for investment. And I would think specifically about development finance. And I would distinguish it very clearly from non-returnable capital. So there's a lot of non-returnable capital that goes into programs like also the ones that I work on, for instance, on improving the foundational digital transformation, or on specifically focusing on improving capability for AI for development. And we do that, just to be very clear, we don't pay for infrastructure, we don't pay for technology. That's not our job, and it wouldn't be very sustainable as a way of funding, you know, those elements. But we focus a lot on the expertise, the technical assistance, improving the frameworks, everything that you need to do at systemic level and market level to make that context more investable. And I come to your point on returnable capital. Where can that investment come from? I think for me, my view is a mix of development finance that the colleagues have already mentioned, where we need to work much closer with the development finance institutions, I think, to encourage them to look at this as a kind of a new sector where it's possible actually to do investment in a way that makes sense. Obviously, as you probably know, World Bank, regional development banks, they do investments which are the ticket size is quite large. So they need to work through funds of funds and a very long chain sometimes to get to the level of those innovators and tech entrepreneurs and, people probably like you, but in lower and middle income countries and lower and middle human development countries, to make sure that, they can invest in those and in those innovations that are the ones that I was referring to in one of my earlier responses. So the ones that have a minimum efficient scale, which is relatively low, but they can really produce those complementary or alternative innovations that can really push AI, kind of lower the barriers to entry and push AI in the direction of development outcomes. And for that, I think we can learn a lot from all the work that we've done. And when I say we, it's just people working in international development. For many, many years, we've worked on trying to fill what people used to call the valley of death for the innovators and SMEs and small scale enterprises, and now, tech startups, tech scale-ups, so they can't get that level of investment that is really suitable to them, both in terms of scale and in terms of terms. So how can we improve that in the private sector, meaning both finance and investment? But then on the other side, how can the development finance institution create that sort of environment for, and that, let's call it investment chain, to really allow for that kind of investment to flow into the right direction. And hopefully, maybe doing something of frugal AI would actually help with that, which takes me to the point of the colleague who International Budget Foundation. And your point is absolutely spot on. I think you heard all of us talking about the environmental cost and sort of the kind of climate challenges of digital transformation, which of course is not just because of AI, but let's say the AI has accelerated that. So again, we potentially with some of the solutions that use, for example, edge computing, so that you can use AI from devices rather than sort of, go through a big data center, you could actually have solutions at a very micro scale, potentially, maybe only for certain type of applications that don't require the massive infrastructure. But that infrastructure is required in many cases. And I think for once I'll mention one specific country, and that's Brazil, not because Pedro is from Brazil, but because I've been, oh, you're not from Brazil yourself. Okay, I thought you were. Portugal, sorry. I made this is a big faux pas. Forgive me. When we spoke here, when you spoke earlier, you thought that I was Brazilian because I greeted you in Portuguese. Okay, the mystery is solved that no, I'm actually of Italian origin. Anyway, so back, AI will resolve all our problems with languages, I'm sure. But actually, I'm mentioning Brazil because I was there for work just a couple of months ago, and what they're doing there, because they have a surplus of renewable energy, they're investing on really innovative models of building data centers that will use that renewable energy, and they can sell the services across the region at least. So they're trying to become leaders in that. So I think seeing these examples coming from transitional countries, from middle-income countries at least, is quite encouraging. But again, sometimes it's also about how do you allow more support to flow into that direction, which takes me to the point from the gentleman from Cambridge University. And I think your point is more about what we've learned maybe in the past from infrastructure sharing, when, pre-AI or certainly pre-generative AI, on the basic level of investment for ICT, there's been a lot of push to see whether within countries, even across countries, there could be a more emphasis on infrastructure sharing. As you can imagine, there's the political economy there's the geopolitics, so there's lots of things get in the way. But I get your point that, of course, there has to be also some level of role of state institutions, and I would argue actually multilateral institutions in pushing that approach to infrastructure sharing where it is possible. And I rest my case again. Thank you.
Courtney, I might ask you to take your question offline at the reception, just because we've got some really interesting questions online, which I wanted to get to as well. And I'll maybe voice out the kind of broad ideas here and ask you to respond. One is from Mohammed El Rashid, who asks, where are the promising policy levers available to the Global South in shaping their own trajectories towards AI development? And a linked question from Felipa Amanta is, how do we kind of disengage from the lock-ins and dependencies created by the structure of the tech market today, right? So if hyperscalers are concentrated within 3 or 4 firms, how do we break out of this kind of cycle? Yes, and how, yeah, again, practically, what do governments and civil society actions and how do people kind of need to intervene to start shaping these agendas for themselves? Yeah, so yeah, moonshot solutions, time
Yes,
for 30
very.
seconds for that.
I'm sure to go, sorry, I'm okay to go reverse if the colleagues are fine, but I'll be quick. So just because I think there we can link actually the answer on, let me take the last one first, because it links directly into what we were discussing just now. Ultimately, to break out of that cycle of the concentration in the debt market, I mean, the colleague online was written that is absolutely spot on. Ultimately, it's on one side is how the financial sector, investment sector works. So we've just said that. But on the other side is really how the market is concentrated. And so what we explained, or if not explained, at least discussed earlier on, what can we do to actually instill healthy competition, encourage innovation in a way that lowers that minimum efficient scale for new innovators to come into the market, and therefore allowing them to show that they're investable and attract capital. So that's one, very shortly. And the second one on the voices, I would say I call them like the voices for the global south. I like to call it the global majority because often it's basically a global majority in the world. And so maybe I'll just very briefly say some work that we try to do as FCDO, but also together, absolutely not just on our own, also with a lot of other partners, both at multilateral level and also with other bilaterals and sort of other international development organizations, is that on one side is about the capability of lower and middle income or lower and middle human development countries in terms of them having the ability to articulate their own plans and strategies and their own preferences ultimately in their own trajectory of digital transformation. But then that's not enough. It's also about them, their voice in international fora. So we try to do work also to support some of our partner countries, at least the ones that want that support, to sort of in a way sharpen their voice in those international fora. But I think it needs to build on that intrinsic capability. And if we look at the sort of value chain of AI, with AI for Development program, for example, we work a lot with on these sort of R&D capabilities of partner countries on, for instance, developing new models. As Pedro was saying earlier on, it's a fluid market. It's where actually there is scope for, more innovation and competition. And at the front end, where the apps, let's say, maybe where the colleague tech founder maybe left, I don't know, maybe is more kind of experienced then. And what Rose was referring to earlier on, all the different kind of innovations, tech innovations that are happening in the different verticals, health, education, agri, finance, you name it, climate tech, etc. We, for instance, through our digital access program, our network of tech hubs, we support local entrepreneurs to actually come up with those innovations, just through technical assistance, and try to connect them with the investors that might be interested in sort of supporting those. I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you.
No, all really good points. So these are heavy questions. Okay. Yeah, so for policy lovers, yeah, so I always say, first and foremost, start with the no regrets, things that with or without AI, the things you should just be doing, just the good stuff that you need in your society, your infrastructure, your governance, you just do those things. If like we're to wake up tomorrow and people are like, psych, AI was a hoax, you've still done the things that you should have been doing. So no regrets, investments. Second, I think this idea of that I think Pedro mentioned, I think Alessandro's mentioned, just trying to find who those first mover use cases and users are. Sometimes in development, we're like so focused on that last mile, like, if the old woman in the village is not using AI, then we have an AI digital divide and we're failed. But, I think like really trying to start with like those first movers, who are the natural first movers, who are the innovators, who are like researchers, like what are the enterprises, what do they need? And that's like, even in I think the Stanford does this like big AI index thing. And I think when they surveyed in the US, actually like the people, a lot of the AI use is in enterprises, and then that kind of flows down. So you always have this first mover thing that countries should be aware of, targeting where you start, so that sometimes in development, we get so distracted with trying to do kind of everything for everyone. And with like to Pedro's point, technology diffusion, you have to be kind of figure out where to start. Then the third thing that's connected to the first 2 points is just kind of more kind of sophisticated planning and strategizing. And so I think like a lot of countries, including in Africa, coming up with AI plans, including the AU has one. And when I read them, they're like 200-page just kind of kitchen sink of everything. And it's just, and then it took 5 years to write it, so that by the time it's been published, like, you know, the world has changed. So I always say prioritization in your planning. So where do I start? What are our niches? What are, you know, are we like a big, like I think I'd looked at, I think Norway and their AI strategy had a big fisheries section. I was like, that makes sense. You know, you're Norway and maybe this is an important sector for you. And so just African countries and poor countries trying to be kind of prioritize where are we starting, what is important, focus in your planning. And then second is agility. So it's not taking forever. So you have very nimble and you're just able to like respond. And so the old ways of planning and strategies don't really allow for that. And then third is proportionality. So, you know, maybe worry less about like existential kind of AGI collapse, but still have a few experts like part of those conversations. So like, you know, just have a way to have a proportional focus on some of the edge things that are not your core priority, but then have emissaries and have ways to kind of keep an eye out so that you're not completely blindsided. And then for the tech consolidation, I don't have the absolute answer for that. I don't know, but actually one thing I find really interesting is when I watch Europe, actually, I think that Europe is one of the few jurisdictions that is really flexing muscles against big tech. And, you know, I think that back to agency and power, they have like 500 million affluent customers. And so Google, all of these tech majors are having to make concessions. And so I think that I would love to see a more clubbing together of like, especially poorer countries to bring your market power together. But then Europe, especially, I'm like, would love to see it continuing to push against these like tech majors, because that really kind of creates space for the rest of us.
Thank you. That was a wonderfully organized 2 minutes. Yeah, thank you. Pedro.
I think both were so well organized that I can only agree with both Alexander and Rose. So I very much agree with Alessandra's point on leverage for lower income countries. So one is being part of the international community, having a seat at the table, being capacitated to participate in these discussions. And then secondly, very much as Rose articulated very well, is don't put the focus on the technology, put the focus on the problems you're trying to solve, on the capabilities you have, on the structure of your economy, on the skills you have. For instance, a country like Angola has actually quite a number of engineers, many of which are working to support the maintenance of offshore oil platforms. But you know, they have those capabilities. So what they are doing now is leveraging AI to use in robotics. Okay, that exists in Angola because of a particular context. It may not exist in Namibia, just down the border, right? Or the example that Rose gave about how India used AI to have better predictions of the monsoon, right? What are the problems you're trying to solve? So ask not what you can do for AI, ask what AI can do for you.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks so much. And that's all the time we have. Okay. Yeah, that was a great way to end this. Yeah. No, that was a fantastic ending note as well, Pedro. Thank you. Great. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for being so attentive and for your wonderful questions. And everyone.